Well, we're here again. Al, thank you for setting up this great meeting with Dr. Cameron Barrows and Mark Fisher and Dr. Al Muth and Colin Barrows, Cheryl McKinley from the Friends of the Desert Mountains doing our Living History project on May 25th, 2017. And we are today at the administrative buildings of University of California, Riverside, located in Palm Desert, California. So thanks for having this great group. It's kind of memorable that you three should get together. And part of what have been exploring is the whole foundation of the conservation movement in this area in particular. What drew people to the cause? What was it like in the early years? How did you begin to slug through the variables that led you to think about a multiple species habitat conservation plan? So, do you have any kind of particular question to start or person you want to start with?
I think I would say that's all stuff that I would like to cover, but I thought maybe to start, we sort of got a lot of accumulated knowledge about fringe-toed lizards, and that's kind of what we're all, that's what the common thing between the people at the seated at the table here is. So maybe we could just start by what is a fringe-toed lizard and why are they important or something like that? Starting with Al, I guess.
Well, what is a fringe-toed lizard? It's a small phrenesomatid lizard. It's endemic to the Coachella Valley fringe-toed lizard. Uma iwanata is endemic to the Coachella Valley. Mm-hmm. No other place in the world. 2 other species in the U.S. 3, 2.
They keep adding them.
Keep adding them. Yeah. Anyway, we got our own.
Yeah.
And their importance is that they have single-handedly shaped the development of the valley for at least the next 80 years. Mm-hmm. The lizard started all the focused conservation effort, and the multiple species plan built off of the momentum that the Coachella Valley fringe-toed lizard started with its habitat conservation plan. Mm-hmm. So, gentlemen?
That was a great introduction.
Of course.
The only thing I would add is that this is a species that is uniquely adapted to sand dunes. It can occur on sand dunes and thrive. Off of sand dunes, it perishes. It doesn't do well at all. And it's characteristic of all the fringe-toed lizards in North America, but also fringe-toed lizards throughout the world. They all seem to have similar adaptations. So the Coachella Valley had at one point 100 square miles of sand dunes. It was abundant lizard habitat. One of Al's mentors, Bill Mayhew, used to refer to or describe driving down little roads and reaching out in his car and noosing these lizards one after the other without ever having to leave the car because it's hot out there. So why leave? You can do that. So this was a super abundant species that occurred absolutely nowhere else in the world except for these dunes because it couldn't get off the dunes. The dunes were an island, much like the Hawaiian Islands or the Galapagos Islands. And as humans figured out ways of developing this sand dune system and fragmenting it and turning it into smaller and smaller parcels and cutting off the life source of the dunes, which is the wind and the sand, the populations declined and constricted and became smaller and smaller and smaller. And that awareness of that process is what really catalyzed and precipitated the conservation movement here in the Coachella Valley.
Mm-hmm. Who was aware of that?
Well, there's only one person at the table that's old enough to be able to answer that question. So.
That was not me.
Or me.
I think the first person to grasp the significance of the wind patterns and the sand sources in this valley was probably Don Weaver. Mm-hmm. And he and Ronaballs and Turner put together a nice report for Army Corps of Engineers, and that's where I got involved. I think that report was 82, and that's what laid out the sand map, if you will, that raised alarms, at least for me and other lizard biologists, that if you cut off the sand, the lizard is going to go away. That's all there is to it. And this is how you cut off the sand, and that's what we don't want to happen. So I think it was Weaver that started the physical aspect of it.
Then, of course, your mentor, Bill Mayhew, led the charge after that.
Bill led the charge along with Bob Stebbins. They got Robert Stebbins at UC Berkeley. They got the lizard listed in 1989? 80. Well, wait, it was listed once before. Then Congress made changes to the Endangered Species Act that required an economic analysis.
Right.
So that
the
was
sequence,
delayed, and then it was listed.
So the Endangered Species Act, the Federal Endangered Species Act, was 1973.
Yeah.
At least the initial listing, which was federally a threatened species and from the state of California, an endangered species, was 1980. And in 1982 is when they amended the Endangered Species Act so that the economic analysis had to happen. And that's when you and Bill Mayhew and others got involved.
It's not the way I remember. We can look it up. I think the economic analysis came before and delayed it. But the critical point was the Endangered Species Act amendments in October of 1982. That's when the protection was extended throughout the range of the animal, not just on federal lands. And when that extension was made, it provided a mechanism whereby the government would not be taking private land. The way to get around that was a habitat conservation plan that supposedly guaranteed the existence of the animal in perpetuity. And that's what made it work.
And the habitat conservation plan for the lizard was the first or one of the first? Is that?
It's debatable because there was a small one in the Bay Area for a small butterfly, the San Bruno blue, I think was the name of the butterfly, that had been basically created before this 1982 amendment. And so they used that somewhat as a model, and then when it happened, they said, okay, here it is. And so it was sort of almost instantaneous. This was the first plans after that. So after the 1982 amendment had actually happened. And it's the first one that included multiple cities plus the county and water districts, and everybody else had to figure this one out. It wasn't just one landowner in one county, which is what the San Francisco one was.
It also was the first one to provide not only habitat, but sources for the habitat, the processes that keep the habitat intact.
And that's a critical point, because if you have a patch of serpentine soil, which was the situation in San Francisco, all you had to do is put a fence around the serpentine soil and you got it. But here you have this very dynamic process of sand moving down the valley. You cut that off and everything downwind is destroyed.
Mark, how did you get drawn into this activity?
I've been a lizard chaser for most of my life. In fact, I saw my first fringe-tailed lizard probably about 1973 or 74 in what is now a housing development. So I've been coming out to the valley for decades chasing lizards and snakes. And when I was in college, I heard there was a job available at Deep Canyon, so I applied for it. And it turned out that the people that told me about it were also good friends of Al's, so I had a pretty easy shoe in on that position, and he made a mistake of hiring me. So, working for Al, being a lizard chaser, I kind of get involved in lizard projects.
Yeah.
What year did you get hired at Deep?
1983.
Okay, so before the plan was finished, and
Yeah.
it was basically right in the middle of that.
Yeah, I was gone a lot of time at meetings for this plan.
So let's talk about sort of how that worked. I mean, so you were in a lot of meetings. Were you doing research across the table? Anybody here was doing research at that point, or just totally?
The meetings were all public hearings.
Right.
It was a highly controversial issue.
Right.
And
So public hearings for the endangered species, for the listing, or
the
for
animal was listed.
Okay.
The issue was that development came to a screeching halt, and the developers were represented by Paul Selzer, the attorney. Paul put together a group called, for lack of a better name, the Lizard Club. And we met at frequent intervals over lunch. Sunrise Corporation provided the lunch. And that was Paul saying, you know, if you get people to sit down and recognize that, you know, you're a person, you have concerns, and you're just not the blankety blank lizard hugger, it helps people talk about solutions to problems rather than argue about the problems. That was Paul's way of doing business. And so after the outline, the initial habitat conservation plan, implementation and such was put together at those meetings, then those plans had to go to every city in the valley and Riverside County to be adopted. And that's what the majority of the public hearings were about.
So we're talking like city council meeting type thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
City council, board of
What were the
supervisors.
years that was happening?
That was from early 83 up until early 85. It was spring of 85 when the plan was actually done and signed off by every city in the valley and the county. The next time that happened, it took 12 years, and then one recalcitrant city came around 3 years later.
So were the public hearing meetings controversial, I guess? So were there like people talking to each other at the meetings, or maybe discussing everything calmly like adults? Or?
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
There were certain city council members that were just bound and determined that the plan wasn't going to happen. Some damn lizard wasn't going to restrict development in my city. Remember one particular meeting in Rancho Mirage. Yes, that the chairperson knew that Gail Kobetich was there from Fish and Wildlife Service, and that Gail wanted to speak. He knew it ahead of time, and we got to, the time in the meeting when that should happen, and the chairman adjourned the meeting. Bang, meeting's adjourned. So, I stood up and said, no, wait a minute. We've got people here from the agencies that want to talk. You knew about that. And he proceeded to rant about the lizard was inhibiting development. There was this big scam anyway. And that something he said triggered my response was, is that an invitation to litigate? You never saw an attorney, a city attorney, move so fast in all your life.
Yeah.
And he jumped up, no, we'll work this out. So, no, they weren't friendly at all.
Yeah. But they
Not at the
eventually
beginning.
signed off. So
The important thing is you can let city council people rant and rave and get their name in the newspaper all they want. But until they say no, it's just a rant. When they say no, you got something to go on.
So eventually you made the economic argument, or they outvoted, or how did that, what was the actual resolution?
It was a combination of things. The developers among themselves made the economic argument that we need to get on with what we do. That it's costing us money to fight this thing. Let's solve the problem and get on. And when you have, in those days, and probably still, your development community and the Building Industry Association finally caving and saying, let's solve it, you're going to get the problem solved.
Did you have a litigator on your side, or were you responsible to stand up and just tell them what the law was and what you needed?
During those times, I represented an organization called the Coachella Valley Ecological Reserve Foundation. It was a foundation set up by Desert Protective Council for the sole purpose of acquiring habitat for the fringed-tailed lizard. And so I represented them on all the political activity because I couldn't represent the university. So that was my cover. And no, we never had an attorney. The Joanna Wald from the National Resource and Defense Council at the time, and she came out once and talked to a group of us, but we were never represented by an attorney in any of the meetings.
Can you tell me how the big preserve was created? This big chunk of land, which keeps the sand blowing and the lizards surviving, and how are they doing today?
I can step in a little bit there. So, as Al described, there was beginning to develop a meeting of the minds as to how this problem was going to be solved. But there was a couple more steps that had to happen, and one of those steps was who's going to pay for it. And although I came in a little bit late, I didn't show up until late 1985, but what I was told was that the development community and the city council said, well, it's a federal law, the federal government should pay for it. And the feds, and especially the conservationists, said, wouldn't be a problem if it wasn't for the active development that's happening here. The developers should pay for it. And that created another potential conflict. Is, we can agree that we should solve the problem, but there's another agreement is how we're going to pay for it, and it's not going to be cheap. At least not by those standards. By today's standards, it was really cheap, but by those standards, it wasn't. And they invited another organization to participate, which is the Nature Conservancy, and that's actually how I got involved, was through the Nature Conservancy. And the Nature Conservancy looked at the landscape and said, well, this is something we do all the time. We set up preserves. You need to set up a series of preserves, and let's do the analysis, see what's worth protecting, that's still left. Let's figure that out. And in terms of who's paying for it, everybody benefits. The cities benefit, developers benefit, conservationists benefit. Everybody benefits. Everybody should pay. And so they came up with a way of spreading the funds out, where there was federal money that was coming in, there was some private fundraising money that was coming in, there was a little bit of state money coming in, not very much, but a little bit. The Bureau of Land Management was going to do some massive land trades to come up with about $6 million worth of land money that way. And the rest of it, the balance, was going to be a mitigation fee levied against the developers. So all of that had to happen. But for all that analysis to happen, they had to figure out how much is it going to cost. And to do that, they had to identify what was left that was worth protecting. And that became a real challenge as well, because you could say, well, let's protect everything. Well, that wasn't going to work. Well, let's protect everything north of the freeway. Well, there's missing stuff south of the freeway. That's not going to work. We have to protect that sand corridor. And that's huge. How are we going to do that? And then that was a discussion where some of the people who were involved said, well, you don't have to protect the sand corridors because nobody would want to build a house there. So it'll just always be open space. So let's save some money. Don't buy that. Let's buy the habitat. And that turned out to be a poor decision.
Yeah.
But that they were convinced of that. And they're also convinced that if the price tag got too high, this wasn't going to work. So everybody was aimed at keeping the price tag relatively low. And that.
Which sand corridor should they have bought? If I'm anticipating what you didn't say.
All of them.
All of them. Can you name a few just so I understand?
Well, there is a corridor that comes out of Mission Creek and Morongawash. That's a corridor. There's a corridor that comes out of Joshua Tree National Park through Thousand Palms Canyon. There's a corridor that comes out of the Indio Hills through what is now Thousand Palms. And then the primary corridor is what comes down the Whitewater River. So all of those needed to be protected, and none of them were officially protected. There was this tacit belief that nobody in their right mind would ever develop theirs, so they were de facto protected. But that turned out not to be true.
Well, the actual source areas were already on federal land.
Right, it was the corridor.
It's the corridor, it's the transport area. You get the way the system works is you have hydraulic transport. It rains, erodes the hills, brings those sediments down, deposits them in these drainages. Once they're there, it's the wind in the transport area that picks up the sediments, sorts it by particle size as you move down the valley. So when you start up at the high wind regimes up towards Whitewater, up in that area, you have fairly big particles. They drop out of the wind first. By the time you get down to Thousand Palms Preserve and towards Indio, those are just very small particle sizes down there. They go from about a millimeter to a tenth of a millimeter. That's sort of the range of alien sand that you get here.
So how many acres is this big yellow preserve that I can see from my house that nobody's built on?
Well, originally, the acreage there that was identified to be acquired, not the sand corridors, just that to be acquired was about 13,000 acres. There were two other somewhat smaller sites, one in the Willow Hole area that was already Bureau of Land Management land for the most part, so there was very little acquisition plan there. And the other one is south of the freeway, which we currently call the Whitewater Floodplain Preserve. And that was primarily owned by the Coachella Valley Water District, and they were willing to allow that to be called a preserve. It was just an area that floodwaters went through.
So I have this picture of what you have is functional, but is not as well rounded as it should be because the sand corridors were not thought of. In other words, it's somewhat tenuous that the preserve is not receiving enough sand because buildings are being put down in places in the wind corridor.
Well, at the time, back in the early 1980s, all those wind corridors were open. And so there was this belief system that they would always stay open. And so in 85, 86 is when the preserve was approved. Everybody liked it. They had a big party at the Palm Springs Desert Museum. That was in April of 86. And at that time, I was actually around. I was working for the Nature Conservancy and managing that large preserve that was the one I guess you look at out there. And it wasn't until a few years later that we started looking at it in a little bit more detail. We had a couple of developments start moving into this place that was never going to develop and start asking questions. Well, are these areas truly protected if development moves in, and how much development can move in before they're not protected? There was, now maybe you can confirm this, the story I heard was one of the corridors leading into the Coachella Valley out of Thousand Palms was completely open, and the county said, don't worry, we'll zone it in a way that will keep it open. We'll put it at one house for 20 acres or something along, which is, I think, the maximum they could have zoned it to control development. And it, unfortunately, one hand of the county wasn't talking to the other hand of the county, and within a year or two, or less even, they rezoned that entire area to high density development. Is that pretty much?
So my memory goes that way.
Yeah, okay. So that was sort of one light bulb, and people started moving in 2 acre parcels or 1 acre parcels, and just filling in that area fairly rapidly. It was at that time pretty cheap land. You just had to put up with the wind blowing through your house, and that's again this sort of catalyst of maybe this isn't going to work unless we do something bigger and better.
So that would be the MSHCD.
That's what it turned out to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bigger
That's what was bigger and better.
Okay. Do you have?
Yeah, what brought you here? You know, did you know about this conservation thing that was starting to bubble up pretty actively, or were you just accepting a job as a ecologist? Or?
Well, I worked for the Nature Conservancy for about 6 years up in Northern California, developing a site there into a research station that was then transferred over to the University of California and is now referred to as the Angelo Preserve. Mm. Once that transition happened, I pretty much got out of a job because now it was the University of California, and there was a resident person who was going to get the job to manage that. And so we started looking around. The Nature Conservancy said, don't worry, we've got another job for you. It's down in the Coachella Valley. And I said, where's that? And they said, well, it's going to deal with sand dunes and lizards. And I said, and I study spotted owls in old growth forests. And they said, well, do you want the job? And I said, yes, I do want the job. And so I came down here by myself, and my wife and young son at the time stayed up in Northern California, scoped it out, figured out what was going to be involved. And that was in late 1985, and then in 1986 we all moved down here.
How old was your son?
About 3 months old.
I met Katie and young Colin at the reception at Palm Springs Desert Museum. I can remember Katie standing there holding this little primate.
She couldn't do it.
So I guess the unanswered piece was, did you have a feeling that this conservation arguments and fight and interesting kind of battle was in the mix for you? What lay ahead about challenges?
Well, at the time, Al and Mark had done their job, and the preserve was established. All I had to do was manage it. Okay. And managing it really meant making a federal agency, 2 federal agencies, the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Bureau of Land Management, work together, which is not always easy, and work together with a state agency, what is now the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and adding in state parks. So there's 2 state agencies, 2 federal agencies, and the Nature Conservancy, and I had to work with them to have them play nice, which turned out to be a much easier job than I was told it was going to be. And what I have since found out, it's not about agencies, it's about people. If you get the right people in the room, it's easy. If you don't, they can come with 100 reasons why they don't want to play well. But the right people in the room and everything works, and we always have the right people in the room. But as a scientist, I was concerned about this sand cores thing, and so we actually hired some of the best sand people in the business at the time. Nick Lancaster was one of them. Another fellow was from Cal State San Bernardino, and we said, tell us where that sand comes from so we know that we've done a good job of protecting it. And what they told us was pretty sobering, that in fact we hadn't protected it, and if we didn't, it was within a reasonable amount of time, maybe a century or maybe even less, we would lose most of the habitat.
How did you respond to that?
Well, as an interesting, first I went to the Fish and Wildlife Service and I said, we have a problem. And they said, well, maybe we can turn this into a win-win, which was then the idea of the multiple species plan. So rather admit, oops, we should have done better, they decided, let's turn this into something, basically make lemonade out of lemons and do something good with it. And that started an idea. But one of the more interesting experiences I had at that time was that one of the groups who was critical to the preserve, which was the Building Industry Association, if they weren't on board, the preserve would have never happened. If they weren't on board, we would never have a multiple species plan. And there was a fellow at the time who was the president named Ed Kibbe. I was at a meeting with Ed, and after the meeting, I need to talk to you. And I knew he was going to bite my head off. I said, Ed, there is a problem here. And I was sure he was going to go, a deal's a deal, you're screwed, I don't care. We got what we wanted out of this.
Yeah.
We're out of it. And do whatever you're going to do, but a deal's a deal. He did the exact opposite. He said, the building industry is invested in making this work. And if you're sure it's not going to work the way it is, then let's make it work. And let's do whatever it takes to do it. And that gets back to getting the right people in the room at the right time. I don't think every building industry association in the country would have had that kind of response, but that's what I got. And that really opened the door to what unfortunately turned into the 12 or more years of negotiation to get from that day to a multiple species plan.
The first time we had a meeting about this multiple species plan, there's a bunch of biologists in the room and said, okay, name all the plants and animals you can think of that might need protection and draw maps of where they would be. And that was, I think, 1997, somewhere back in the period. And it turns out that map is just about what the preserve system is today, but it took 12 years to get to that.
Yeah, but things didn't change from that. It was a bunch of plastic over a big map that was a little bit bigger than this table. And we all got in with our markers and said, well, you have to do this, and if you do this, you have to do that. And this has to be connected to that. And that was pretty close to what it ended up to be.
What took the 12 years? The actual research and such? No.
Yeah, that was the easy part.
No, the answer was from, as Mark just said, we had the answer from almost the first day. And this is the unfortunate thing. It gets back to having the right people in the room. If you have the wrong people in the room, it can go on forever. And the wrong people in the room, surprisingly, and I'm going to say this on tape, but was the federal agencies, the Fish and Wildlife Service. They weren't, and this is my opinion, but I think I'm right, they realized that this idea of a multiple species plan eventually meant that they lost control. Because it was a negotiation between a bunch of people, including developers, that would solve a problem, and then the problem was solved. And at least the local folks liked the idea of being able to individually address every single development and be able to extract blood from every single development. And the idea of just having a blanket solution that allowed, or created a roadmap and said, you can develop there and you never have to do anything other than pay your fees, but you have to protect this. And I don't think that ever set well with them. They like the idea of hitting it project by project. I mean, that's my opinion.
There's one or two people in particular from the federal agencies that were really seemed obstructive to the whole process.
Just because they wanted to do it their way, or they were going to make money from it, or
Well, they're not going to make money, but it was releasing their power and their control to the cities and the county and this group of scientists that were around the table.
Yeah, Kim said one of my favorite expressions is the science is easy, the people are hard. And that's what it was.
So was there a convincing that needed to happen there, or was it just 12 years of field dragging and then the 12 years you sign it and you're done there?
You know, there was several points along the way where almost everybody was willing to just stand up and say, it's not going to work. Sorry. It's time for those entities that do lawsuits to get involved, the Sierra Club or the Audubon Society or whoever. And there was this federal agency, and again, it was just a couple of people, it's people, not the agency, that were obstructing. But there was, out of frustration, the local agency had people that were not helping the matter. And they did a reshuffle of staffing locally. And when that happened, you got somebody who, instead of basically sort of, there's a term that I've heard, it's called breasting, where people get up and sort of bump chests and say, it's going to be my way or no way. Yeah, something like that. Instead of doing that, this person said, let's go out to lunch, let's talk it over. And it gets back to what Al said about the original Lizard Club. Let's sit down over a meal and figure out how to solve the problem. And when that discussion happened, and they specifically took the 2 or 3 obstructionists out of the Fish and Wildlife Service and said, you're not coming to lunch, let's find somebody who isn't an obstructionist. And they started their own discussion, and that's really when the solution started happening.
Colin and I are always thinking about, how do we continue this mission? How do we protect? And what are the skills that you learned? And what are the lessons that you learned that we need to embody in carrying this conservation movement forward? And so I don't know if along the way you have something you want to share. You mentioned something at the beginning about 80 years. We're protected for another 80 years.
That's the time frame for the multiple species plan. It was originally 80 years. It's down to a few years less now.
72 years or something like that.
72 years. Anyway, it just, for that length of time, what can be developed, what it'll cost you to develop in other places. Caltrans got all their projects literally approved for the next 80 years. And I think there's this thing called a shifting baseline. And the way I remember the world as I was growing up is different than what my grandfather knew. And it's different than what Colin knows, because things have changed from the time Cam moved into the valley. So by the time we get 80 years down the line, if this project does what we want it to do and it holds up, then that generation is going to remember that as the baseline. And I think that'll help preserve it and keep it in place. So as we go down the line, there's going to be several generations of people in the Coachella Valley Conservation Commission and other groups in the valley that will use the plan as a template, as an outline, to keep things in the direction you're supposed to go. So I think you just support the plan as it goes. That's what you need to do. Yeah.
Well, one of my concerns is not that the plan isn't as good as it possibly can be. It gets back to the people. And as Al is retiring in 30 days. 30 days. Mark might retire in a couple of 3 years. Or depends on how things go with Al's replacement, I suppose. I'll hopefully never retire, but all of us are aging, unfortunately.
Some more graceful than others.
That's true. And so the question then becomes, who are our replacements? Who are the people that are going to carry this torch going forward? And with a couple of exceptions, there doesn't seem to be a lot of young people filling in behind us. And I think that is my greatest concern, is that there will be people who don't understand what we went through to get here, how important it is to keep that baseline established and moving in the right direction. And when things change at the Coachella Valley Association of Governments, and the people there weren't part of the battle, and they don't remember that, and the people at this table are gone, and so that they don't, the new people don't remember the battle and what had to happen. That concerns me, and it is something that I don't know how to solve. I think local conservation groups are doing well, but if you look at the demographic of the local conservation groups, with few exceptions, they're retired people. How do we get that younger generation engaged and funded so that they see this as a career rather than something their parents did? I see that as a problem in the future that we really need to solve.
I do not have an answer to that one.
If I had an answer, I would have thrown it right
You would
out.
be teaching it. I think the funding is a big deal. And I think that, the telling the story as you have and trying to make the story more available so that people have an appreciation of why the mountains look the way they do and why the desert still looks the way it does. Because not many people, I don't think, have a clue that there was work that went into this and that there still is work going on into this. Colin, do you have some questions?
Yeah, but let me think about that. What's our time while we're pause here?
2:51.
You've got about 40 minutes to meet your deadline.
Perfect. Well, we might as well. So I had a couple more. I wanted to continue a little bit more on sort of the research question because, something that we talked about, Al, the last time is like who is telling you to do what you did, and the answer is like nobody. Basically, you just kind of get it. Other than Bill Mayhew a little bit, but
one of the things that was apparent when we started with the Fringed Lizard Plan was that we didn't know anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
That most of the plan was built on inference from other small phrenocymated lizards and bits and pieces of this and that. And so when Mark and I started work in '85, it was just to figure out some of the basic demographic population things about the animal. 33 years later, we're still not sure we know enough, but we started it because one, we were interested.
right.
Two, there were a number of fundamental biological questions that needed to be answered.
Right.
And what you do with that information is then give it to the people that are actually managing on the ground and saying, okay, this is what we found. You can use this in your day-to-day operations or your long-term planning. So that's why we started.
Right. But I mean, I guess, from the outside, you're both employees of Deep Canyon. There aren't any French-tailed lizards in Deep Canyon.
Not at all.
Right. So, and your position isn't necessarily a research position at all. So you had to kind of decide that you wanted to go find these questions. I mean, someone needed to go do it.
Well,
so who else was going to do it? Right.
We're both scientists.
Right.
And we saw a need. The faculty director on campus, the UC Riverside campus, was Bill Mayhew. And he's the one that started all this fringe stuff. He was nothing but supportive. And when Bill retired, John Rotenberry, an ornithologist, another scientist who recognizes the importance of all this, he encouraged us. Now, the current director, Kim Hammond, I think she'd be upset if we quit. I mean, now we've built an institution. Come on, 33 years of demographic information on one lizard population. There's nothing else like that in the world. So,
Well, that study we started out was going to be
Yeah.
2 or 3 populations that we were studying. We get to know really well, and then we expand it to other areas. Well, it turned out that you can't actually capture the entire population in any short amount of time. You have to go out there. We go out there 2 days a week, and for the entire season to capture everybody who's on the site and mark them all. And it just got to be that there's no way we could expand it to other sites, so we just limited it to a single site. And then when Cam came along, he had a different technique for doing population monitoring, so he was able to do that at different sites based on knowledge that we learned from our site.
Exactly.
So essentially,
one of these days I'll get it right.
yeah. So essentially, what you started with was trying to figure out how many lizards there were out there.
That's the simple question. How many are there?
That's the basic question.
Is that the same every year? And what is the population structure?
And you would have do that by going out and counting lizards.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Exactly.
Counting and marking, so you knew whether you
Right.
counted
And that's
it
what I
before.
want. That's what I want to get to. It's like, what are the challenges of? You can't just go out and say there's a lizard, there's a lizard, there's a lizard, there's a lizard, right?
Right. You have to capture them, you have to mark them. And it's an open population. So our study plot is in the middle of a big area that all has lizards, so there's lizards moving in and out. Lizards are being born and dying, so it makes it much more complex than just going out there and counting lizards. Okay, that's what the population is, period.
Now, those questions are fundamental questions that are simple to ask, but they're darn hard to answer. You go out there tomorrow, you can count every lizard you see. We're going to go out there the next day. We're going to see more, we're going to see less. What's the right number? That's why we have an enumerated population. Say we've marked every animal on the site. We continue doing that, so that from year to year we know who survived, who hasn't. The survivorship is
how
just
long
a
do they
fundamental question.
The longest we see is about 8 years. It's about 50% mortality rates. So if you start out with 100 lizards one year, you got 15 next year, 25. Well, it doesn't take very long before you don't have any animals left.
And then your probability of finding those few animals that are left from that cohort is fairly low. So
the answer to your question is something that only came because of that long-term study. If they hadn't done that, you could have asked that question. You could have said, have no idea how long they live. I don't know if they are like side blotch lizards and basically the whole population turns over within 2 years, or are they like chuckles that might live 25 or 30 years, and it turns out they're somewhere in between.
And getting back to what Colin said, is everybody wants to know how many are there. That's the big question. How many are there? Well, what our studies together have shown is that really isn't the important question. Is how are they doing? Are they reproducing when they should be? And how are the numbers relative to, say, rainfall and how much food is out there and other resources? And so we've come up with ways to pretty much measure how the reproductive rate changes based on rainfall. And so we're looking at, trends in the population. Is that matching what it should? And if not, then there must be something going on.
So what Mark just said is so critical to this sort of science, because as you said, and it drives me crazy, every time I talk to a reporter, the first question they ask is, how many are there? I said, well, probably not as many as yesterday, but I don't know. And I'll never know that, because it's a changing number and it's changing all the time. And so if you can't know that, what you need to know is what's driving the population up or down, and what are those factors, and are those factors something that we can or should control, or is it something that, like rainfall in climate that we're not going to have a big impact on. So in the work that I'm doing, we're focusing on some of those things like what does fragmentation do to the population? What do invasive plants do to the population? And how does that impact them? Should we figure that an invasive plant is just replacing a native plant and it really doesn't make any difference? Or does that invasive plant have a completely different impact on the environment and it does make a difference? And those are really critical questions because getting rid of invasive plants is expensive, challenging, and sometimes feels like it's impossible. So how do you deal with that? But if you don't, then all the preserves in the world aren't going to help you.
So, I guess part of my question is when you started, how many of those challenges did you realize this is something we're going to have to account for? Or were you just thinking, I'm going to go out there and see how many lizards I can find and that everything?
We were a bit more than a bit. We were naive going into this sort of thing. And had we stopped after 2 years with what we knew then, we have been completely wrong with most things. What we know now, after getting some idea of how the population behaves in the real world. And
so my question to you is, knowing what you know now, if you were with that knowledge, but you figured you have another 33 years left of research in you, would you start over? Would you do it again?
You'd have to be out with me every day with you.
that's the downside. I think I wouldn't do it again. And I think I'd continue doing it the same way we're doing it now.
Okay.
It's hot work. It's hard work. You've been out there, you know. But this is really some fundamental population biology that nobody else is going to do.
That's true.
We do. I mean, if had I been in grad school and started this, there's no way in hell I would have started this kind of a project. I need a project that has an end to it so I can graduate. We were fortunate to be at Deep Canyon and have the support from the campus that essentially said, go for it, guys. And I think it's paid off. Of course, it's our work.
Yeah. I'll be no bias.
Well, when you say paid off, in which way?
In terms of knowledge.
Okay.
And what we know and how we expect the population to respond to these various challenges and such.
So, go ahead if you have something.
Yeah, I just had that question left over for Kim, which is the one about what have you discovered, if anything, about whether the lizards do just as well with invasive plants as with natural ones?
Well, the quick answer is it depends. And it depends on which invasive plant we're talking about. And it depends on the density of those plants. So one of the first jobs I tried to tackle was go back to Bill Mayhew. He came up to me and said, your only job is to get rid of Russian thistle. That's it. Just get rid of Russian thistle and the lizard will be fine. It's essentially what he told me. And I spent a lot of time like, how am I going to do this? What am I? And
Back at that time, it covered the duty.
It did. And so by the mid 80s, late 80s, it was starting to thin out a little bit. So rather than just get everybody I could to pull out Russian thistle, I decided to do some science. Let's ask a question. Is this going to have an impact? And it started because when I was doing these surveys for the lizard and knowing that the Russian thistle was this terrible, terrible thing, we used to bring sticks with us, pop it out of the ground and let the wind blow it away. And more often than not, when we popped it off the ground, there'd be a baby fringed-tailed lizard underneath it. And one day somebody said, well, they're living there. Are you really doing the right thing by getting rid of all of these Russian thistles? And so go back, let's do the science. Let's analyze, is the lizard population denser where there is a moderate density of Russian thistle, or are they better off when it's something else? And the answer, surprisingly, was they did better when there was Russian thistle there. And it wasn't that they weren't eating it, but what they were doing is that they had a hiding place that nobody else could go in there. If you've ever tried to reach underneath a Russian thistle, you don't have to ask why that would be the case.
Just thinking about it.
But then another invasive plant showed up, which is Sahara mustard. And so then it's, well, is this going to be a similar situation? Let's do the science. And we found the worst case scenario is the Russian thistle stabilizes the dune. That's a bad thing. It needs to be an open flowing dune. The Russian thistle excludes the native plants. That's a bad thing because there's that diversity of seeds and bugs and other things that are now being affected. The Sahara mustard has this direct impact on the bugs that fringe-tailed lizards eat. It reduces them because those bugs are associated with those native plants, not with Sahara mustard. And there's this cascade of effects that ultimately mean that if we don't deal with Sahara mustard, we're going to have less habitat for the fringe-tailed lizard. Thank goodness there are certain preserves that are just so windy that the Sahara mustard can't get established, and that's the whitewater floodplains. But it sort of peeks its head in around the edges, and then the winds come up and it's gone. But out here at the preserve across the road here, it can be a continuous ocean of Sahara mustard, and at that point, we could be losing our ability to protect the species there. So the problem there is now how do you get rid of Russian thistle? It's actually really easy to kill Russian thistle, but it's really hard to kill Russian thistle and not kill everything else. And you don't want to kill native plants. You don't want to obviously kill fringe-tailed lizards. And so solving that problem is one that we're still dealing with and wrestling with.
Thank you, Mr. Mustard.
Yes.
Yeah.
That whole discussion, whenever I said Russian thistle, I meant Sahara.
Just at the very end.
At the very end.
last four. Yeah.
Just for posterity, Cam. Don't worry.
Well, we have to have it recorded.
The record, we can make some changes and record. We won't, but we could.
We should have somebody else's voice.
Yeah, exactly.
I have another question, which is a little different, and that has to do with who brings up this multiple species plan? Whose idea was that? Did that? I think you alluded to it. Kind of came from somebody else, or how did we arrive? Is this a common scientific kind of concept that we need to do this, and this is how? And it's just such a brilliant kind of thought.
I think it's a political solution to a potential biological problem. I first became aware of it through Bill Haver. And Bill, was he with the Mountains Conservancy? Yeah, he was with the Coachella Valley Mountains Conservancy at the time. And how Bill, who approached Bill and who brought it up, I don't know.
Well, there were other multiple species plans elsewhere so it's kind of modeled.
I think you have to think about Al, the royal we, created the fringe-tailed lizard plan back in 85, 86. It was finally a done deal at that point. And that set a model for everybody else in the country to follow. If you need to solve a problem, here it is. And there were a few other plans that did that. They focused on one species and they did that. And somebody, politically speaking or financially speaking, said, doesn't it make more sense to add more species into it and solve a larger problem rather than having to come back in 5 years or in 15 years or more and say, we got to do this again. And so, as Mark just said, these multiple species plans started showing up around the country. And when we identified that protecting the sand source, actually protecting it, not just assuming it was never going to be developed, but actually protecting it was a needed next step, that's when everybody said, well, rather than focus on just that, let's create overall protection. And that's the carrot, is that you're then telling the Building Industry Association and the cities, this solves the conservation problem forever.
Yeah.
It's not just this, the next species won't come around the corner in the next 2 or 3 years. You solve it and it's done.
Right. I guess the question is, who woke up one morning and said, aha?
Well, as I think I mentioned before, when I went to the Fish and Wildlife Service and said, we have a problem. The Fish and Wildlife Service, have a problem because this plan may not ultimately work. Rather than saying, oh yeah, you're right, we screwed up, they said, okay, let's make lemonade. Let's create something like is happening elsewhere, these multiple species plants. That's when I first heard about it. And for me, it was like, oh, that's going to be really hard. Why don't we just solve the fringed-tailed lizard problem? And they said, no, we're going to add 26 more species. And those 26 species are what form the multiple species plan.
Nice.
Yeah, I was just thinking about thinking too hard about trying to keep everything kind of contained on the as far as the tape goes to make it easier to edit. But I think we've all on the same decided that's just going to be impossible. So we can bounce around a little bit, I guess. To go back a little bit to the sort of the research question, or to the fringed-tailed lizard in particular, sort of maybe you could go around the table if everybody has something like something when they learn something, when your research taught you something about the fringed-tailed lizard that was a surprise, maybe, or something that sort of particularly sticks out to you, if not a surprise, or some if that kind of makes sense. Like, what do we know now about fringed-tailed lizards that we didn't know 30 years ago that you think is maybe important if you can't think of a surprise, or if anything that sort of.
Well, everything we know now we didn't know 30 years
Right.
ago. One of the things that we're doing right now that to me is sort of opening new doors in terms of my mind and how things work is understanding the impacts of what we've done or allowed to happen is fragment this population into smaller and smaller pieces. And then assuming that as long as that sand source is maintained, we can maintain the one at the Whitewater floodplain reserve. When we maintain the population of Lowell, we can maintain the population of Windy Point, we can maintain the population across the freeway behind me here. And I think I was thinking that going on, as long as we keep that sand flowing, we can do that. And then a few years back, somebody said, well, let's do the genetic analysis and see how these guys are doing. And the first time they did that, which was back in 1996, they said all the fringed-tailed lizards in the Coachella Valley are genetically equal. There's no real differences. There's no structure to the population. And that matched what I thought should happen. Then somebody back in 2008 said, let's do that again. I said, well, why do it again? You're going to get the same result. But they did it anyway, and we helped them. Mark and I especially helped them catch a bunch of lizards. And they did the analysis and said, every single population now is different. And some of them, based on the genetics they did, are really losing genetic diversity. They've gone through bottlenecks because they've been in this relatively small preserve, and there's no way to connect them genetically to any of the other populations. And it becomes a really interesting problem there is that, so the geneticists immediately said, well, we need to pick up lizards and move them back and forth and recreate this population that everybody's the same. And a few of us, I think me and I think Mark,
Three of us.
yeah. Well, now wait a minute. Each of these preserves is quite different. They're either hotter, or they have different sand sizes, or they have different food sources. They're all different. Should we be just blending them all together, or should we think that maybe this genetic differences that they've identified, the geneticists have, is unique to that site and maybe helps them live there better than the one on the other side if you threw it over the fence. And that's what we're toying with right now. Is we're going through the third round of collecting the tissues and seeing how this genetic difference is either getting more separate or less separate, or what's happening over time. That analysis hasn't happened yet. But that just completely changed the way I looked at conservation. I thought we could protect them forever on the whitewater floodplain. And maybe we can, but this genetic question is really changing my mind about things.
And this is the first time anybody has done this long-term genetic research in the country, in the world, as far as that.
It is really, that's true, but the other part of it is the first time we've had the technology to do it reasonably well.
So is it that the lizards are adapting to whichever little eco niche they're living in? You know,
Maybe.
they're becoming slightly different from their fellows because
That's the question.
you still don't know that?
We don't.
Right, that was the follow-up question, what do you want to know next, I guess, so maybe that answers it already. Yeah.
Yeah, so if the rate of differentiation continues, then you think, okay, that's because they're too small, there's not enough genetic material. But if it kind of peters off and forms a plateau, then maybe they've just adapted to the local conditions of that place. And that's what we're hoping. That's the only way to answer that question.
Why are you hoping that?
Because if it's the other option, then we have to somehow find a way to mix more genes into it.
And what we know from other translocation experiments is that when you take a bunch of individuals and you move them out of their homes and move them to someplace else, that's not always very successful. Sometimes it is, but it's often not. They've been doing that with tortoises, they've been doing it with Gila monsters, they've been doing it with a lot of different species. And we could basically sacrifice a lot of individuals trying to figure that out. I'd much rather keep them where they are. But if the genetic problem continues to deteriorate, that may not be an option.
It's more complicated than that.
Yeah, of course, it always
So I was talking with Jeff Lovich, who's doing the tortoise surveys for the Coachella Valley Conservation Commission. And Jeff is a world-recognized authority on tortoises, staying up in the canyon while he works out on the Chuckwalla Bench. And he was talking last night, he was talking about a study that had just been published regarding translocation, taking, in this case, tortoises at Fort Irwin from this part of the population, moving them a couple of miles over here. They transported large numbers. And then they went back and started looking at the genetics, who's related to who. And what they found out is not one of the translocated males reproduced. Was not represented in the last 2 years for the clutches. So it might be more complicated than just moving all males and females. Do you just move females? What? And then if you do, what about the males that are over here in harm's way? So it's never easy, never simple. And did you? One of the things that surprised me was the breadth of their diet. Boy, if it grows out there, or it moves, they're going to eat it. They're opportunistic. And it's the how labile their growth is. You know, a really bad year, they won't reach maturity until way late in the following season. August, thereabouts, Mark? They'll hatch in August, and it'll be the following August that they'll reach reproductive size.
Depends on the year.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bad year. But up before that, they might reach it, say, in June. So they have this labile growth rate that owls don't do that. Okay. So you can just have these creatures sitting there and not growing, just waiting for the right things to come about. And you have to realize that, unlike mammals, reproductive maturity is a size issue in most reptiles. In mammals, it's predominantly an age issue. So lizards can just afford to sit there and wait.
It's a strategy that's worked for a while.
A few 100 million years, yeah.
Mark, did you have anything different to?
Yeah, I think one of the things that surprised me early on is that I had learned in ecology that animals live in this stable stage where every year you've got more young, fewer the next stage, fewer the next stage. So it makes this pyramid shape, and that's just the way it is. And studying desert lizards, you learn that no, it doesn't work. If it's a bad year, they don't have enough food, so they just don't reproduce. And if they don't reproduce, then you don't have that big group of young ones the next year. And it's not bad that they don't reproduce. If there's not enough food, why waste it on producing young that can't eat anyway? And so it just broke all my ideas of what basic desert ecology was about. Desert ecology.
So I had Al's point about the growth brought the question to me, what's the biggest French-tailed lizard you've ever seen? So we can kind of show for the camera here, something like that.
How long is this table?
Yeah.
Well, that's snakes, isn't it? I mean, they're always,
Well, it's actually the fish that Mark catches down at Baja.
yeah.
Or no, the one I missed.
What would be the biggest?
You said the other day that you said was somewhere around 30 pounds?
I think by the end of the day it was up around 40 pounds, but unfortunately I missed it. The biggest one that we have caught, I believe, is 120 millimeters, and
That's cement or
yeah, it's
yeah.
not
So then another half again.
just about the.
Yeah.
I don't remember the weight. But
Probably pretty close to 45 to 50 grams.
yeah,
That
I
would be
suspect
more than that.
we've had some that were over
60 or
50, but yeah.
So not very big, but still, that's for a French-tailed lizard.
Yeah.
Well, the whole lizard with the tail is going to be, those big guys are going to be, do it for the camera, something about like that.
Well, if you do it by how much they cost, or by the pound, they're a damn expensive lizard.
So, Colin, you have 9 minutes before you.
Yeah, I think do you have anything left, or we're sort of, that's kind of my fun question to wrap up what I've got to ask. But
Yeah, it's more fun questions. A lot more.
what's that?
You had some more fun questions.
Well, I was looking. I have this list of. I don't have it ready to go today, but for Harry Quinn, the last person we talked to, I had a list of sort of mix of serious and fun questions, and I just happened to look back at it yesterday. And the last question on the list is if you could be a bighorn sheep or a lizard for the day, which would you choose? And I was kind of laughing because if I gave it to this table here.
What's that sheep in this room?
Yeah.
We don't
So
fish.
if you had to choose a lizard to be for a day, which lizard would you choose? Maybe that's still too easy, but at least it's not everybody saying French-tailed lizard immediately.
Yeah.
No,
Some be cool lizards.
either a Komodo or a marine iguana.
Pretty big, huh?
I mean,
You just want to be big enough to eat people.
well,
Well, we go on and be a vegetarian.
marine iguana is a vegetarian,
Yeah.
but the experience of being through this quote amphibious lizard, that's kind of unusual.
Maybe a chuckle. I mean, they've got this
I
kind of
would
relaxing life where
That's neat.
I like the chuckle.
in the spring they get up and they eat in the morning, and then they go search for mates, and by late spring, early summer, they just hang out in the rocks and don't come out anymore. They do that for 20, 30 years.
They basically eat as much as they can and find as many girls as they can, and that's life.
Mhm.
Since we wanted to be a chuckle too, just so you
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
Oh, I think one of your questions was a pretty good one. The one about if you could go back in time.
Oh,
and
yeah.
How the valley used to be. Can you phrase that?
Yeah. It's just, if you could go back in time, same thing. Like if you could spend a day going back in time, you had a time machine, and you could go back to 12 million years ago when this was like just starting to be a desert, maybe, or you could go back to yesterday, or whatever it would be. What would be your go around the table? Yes, has to be one. Well, we'll go around the table, and then you can go back if you want to have a second answer. But yeah. What would be your first choice?
I would like to go to, for lack of a better term, a primordial Coachella Valley where we could see fringe-toed lizards unimpeded by what humans have done to the valley, and see that entire system working the way it worked before we got there. I'd like to be able to experience that.
So what would be the earliest year then, you think?
Well, I mean, if we've got the time machine, we might as well use it well. So I'd go back maybe about 5,000 years.
Right, but I guess you could go back maybe 100 years.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you'd maybe have the same experience, but 5,000 years would definitely be a primordial Coachella Valley.
So since you could tell me about what you saw, then I'd go back 500 years, pre-European, and just to see what it was like with the
Native.
Yeah. Because it would be very similar, I think, in the middle of the valley.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to live in the sand years.
I'd go back a little further than Mark, probably around 900 years ago, when sand dune system was there, well established, pre-European, but Lake Kawea would still be there. It'd be very interesting to see Lake Kawea.
Do we have any idea then what effect that would have had on the sand dune, or would it?
Well, the temperatures in the lakes might create a low pressure, which could create stronger wind gusts coming in.
So also the Algodones dunes, I think they had their origin from the shoreline of Lake Kawea. Lake Kawea has been up numerous times.
Right.
They were probably there, but would have been a bit smaller. And that's where you got Umanotata, the
Right.
not the Mojave,
It's called Colorado Fringe.
Colorado fringe stuff.
Right.
That's probably what I would have done.
Does anybody want to go back for a second answer, just in case?
My second answer, assuming the time machine is as good as you think it's going
Still
to be,
working.
It still works.
would to be go forward in 100 years and see whether this worked or not.
Good one.
And I'd go a little farther. Maybe several hundred years.
One of the we have a video or the time of video that the Nature Conservancy produced about the development of the original lizard preserve, and Bill Mayhew plays a very prominent role in that. And at one point, he describes the preserves or preserve that would be created as something that the people of the Coachella Valley would cherish, much like people in New York cherish Central Park. I don't think we're there yet, and so I'd like to know if 100 years from now or 200 years from now, that prophecy comes true, that it becomes something that the people of the Coachella Valley cherish, and if they see any sort of erosion of that, like people dumping trash or off-road vehicles or whatever, hoverboards at that point, who knows what, that they become indignant because that's something that they cherish so much. I hope that's true.
I think we need to do more visioning like that and more planting of those kinds of seeds for folks. And, I mean, if we're worried about bringing people along, that would be one way that we could try to share what we think might happen.
Well, it seems like in this valley that we're kind of moving in that direction with the mountains and everything, where
I hope so.
it's starting to become more cherished.
Yeah. Thanks for that.